And it reads as follows in the New King James Version. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And for the sake of the verbiage that is used, if you don't mind, I want to read these same verses in the Amplified Version.
Come on, read it.
And it reads, then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from another place. And you and your father's house will perish, since you did not help when you had the chance. And who knows whether you have attained royalty for such a time as this, and for this very purpose. You guys may have your seats. Now, in order for us to really understand the magnitude of this moment, the significance of this statement, we have to take a moment to really dive in and sit with the history surrounding it. And by the grace of God, I had some time to do so. So if you don't mind, for those of you that may not be as familiar with these particular verses or these particular characters in the Bible, I would love to take you on a journey that provides you with some context. As I prepare to introduce you to this gentleman by the name of Mordecai and this woman of purpose by the name of Esther. Now, at this point in history, the people of God, the Israelites, the Jews, had demonstrated a pretty clear tendency to rebel against God, to do things their own way, to give of themselves to everybody and everything except the God who created them, delivered them, provided for them, protected them. Sound like today, right? Hello? Okay? They ignored the prophets. They ignored the men and the women of God. They ignored the warnings. They ignored the clear communication concerning what would be their portion if they did not turn back to God. Therefore, God remained faithful to his word and followed through with the consequences that he clearly communicated well beforehand. And that verbiage is just funny to me because we always say he's faithful to his word when it's for the good things, right? But God has clearly communicated some things to us, some warnings that if you do not get this together, sister, if you do not turn back to me, if you do not put me in my right position, then I will remain faithful to my word. And the consequences will come through just like the promises you want to. Okay? So the people of God are exiled from the promised land, from God's best for them because of their disobedience to him. However, at this point in time, some of them have begun to return back to the promised land, yet some of them remain where they are. They got comfortable in a place of exile, in a place where they were never even meant to be in the first place. But that's another story for another day. So in Esther chapter 1, we are introduced to a very powerful king. A king who reigned over 127 provinces or territories, regions, from India to Ethiopia. And this man is something else, honey. Listen, this king, we literally find him 3 years into his reign in Persia. And he decides to host a feast, a banquet, a celebration, so to speak, for all his officials, all his nobles, anybody who was somebody was in the place, okay? Now, this celebration was actually only being hosted, hear me, to allow him the opportunity to show off his kingdom, his rule, his majesty, his reign, his riches. It was all about him. But what got me was, guess how long this celebration lasted? 180 days. A 6-month celebration for you to show off your kingdom. But if that wasn't enough, when the 180 days are up, he adds a 7-day feast in the court of the garden of his palace. And brings out all the finest of everything, from the draperies to the glasses to the finest of wine. And he does this with excellence and abundance. Everybody gets to drink as much as they want, or as little as they so desire, and they simply have a good time. Now, for the sake of time, I won't dive into this portion as much as I could, but it is during this time that a series of events takes place with the queen. Queen Vashti is her name. But the queen makes the king so angry that he ultimately bans her from his presence. He issues a public decree concerning it, and then he prepares to give her position as queen to someone who was better and more worthy than she. So in Ezra chapter 2, this king, this ungodly king, this pagan king, this king who was not in covenant with the Most High God, he begins to gather virgin girls from all over, who would then enter into what would be similar to a beauty contest for one night with the king. It's almost as it's a raffle. He entered, as you go to this one night, it's a raffle, or it's up in the air as to whether or not you could possibly become the queen. You get the night, but you don't necessarily get the title.
Come on. Talk.
You get the one night with the man, but you don't necessarily get the ring. It's still up in the air as to whether or not I'm going to be the queen. You know, okay, that's what's happening, right? Now, it is at this point in time that we are introduced to two Jews. A man by the name of Mordecai and his cousin, Esther. So this means that these two individuals were in the lineage of God's chosen people. They were in covenant with God. They came from royalty. Being that the very first king of Israel, King Saul, is a member of their tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. So they had history, they had connections, they had a culture, they had a language, even a name that made them different from what they were surrounded by.
Come on.
Now the text tells us that both of Esther's parents had died and that she was raised as the daughter of her cousin, Mordecai. Scripture says that she is lovely in form and appearance. So she had a nice shape and she was easy on the eyes, right? So in other words, you know, she not only did she look good, but apparently she was untouched. Keep in mind, these are virgin girls that they gathered together, right? So as a result of the king's command, she is one of the women that are taken to enter into this beauty contest. She goes through time of preparation, 12 months in length.
That's right.
6 months of this and 6 months of that, in addition to other types of treatment and provision. And she is doing this for the opportunity, again, to spend one night with the king, in hopes that she would stick out above the rest.
Come on.
Now, as I really sat with this story, it began to bother me, because she isn't verbally saying much, so we don't know how she is feeling about any of this. But for me, it's like, okay, God, she's in covenant with you, right? She's associated with you, but this behavior, this movement, or even just this experience as a whole, I know this can't be pleasing to you. I know this can't be the perfect will of God for this woman's life. So God really began to deal with me on that. And then it hit me that if I'm going to deal with women of purpose, then I've got to deal with the things that they may have engaged in or experienced that they believe disqualify them from purpose. Hear me, purpose is defined by Oxford Languages as the reason for which something is created or for which something exists. And if we are honest, some of us have a past that is so tarnished that we feel disqualified to do what we are actually created to do. Listen to me, Esther experienced a great deal of loss. She experienced the death of both of her parents. And as a woman who had to deal with the death of my father, I know firsthand that with just one parent missing from the household, that there are issues that a woman faces, such as abandonment, rejection, feeling as if you are not enough, the feeling of being unworthy and insignificant. And this woman lost both of the individuals that actually contributed to who she was as a woman. Think about the heartbreak, the loneliness, the lack of stability the insecurity, the confusion that is probably present concerning her identity, the tears this woman has cried, the years that she has probably compared her life with others, the holes, the voids that are possibly present in her heart. Hear me, at this point in Scripture, this woman is not yet recorded saying one word. She has no voice.
Come on.
Anybody feel like they don't have a voice in what happens in their life from time to time? Things are just happening. She has no voice. She is silent. Yet the little bit that we are told concerning her has already spoken volumes. And believe it or not, I believe a lot of us can relate to the movement and or the experience of Esther more than we would like to admit. Okay, y'all want me to make it plain, right? Okay. All we have discussed so far ultimately is that Esther went through a season of her life where although she was in covenant relationship with God, her life, her movement, her action, her experiences did not seem to reflect that relationship. So the question becomes, do you remember a time in your life where you didn't necessarily act like a Christian? Where you were making some moves that weren't necessarily Christ-like? Listen to me, do you remember a season of your life where you may have been investing time and energy into becoming a better you for someone else? Oh yeah, we going there. Okay, where you may have been changing things about you, covering up some things about you, diminishing some things about you, disregarding some things about you so that you can look more attractive to them. Hear me, eating differently and moving differently and seeing yourself differently so that you can be their choice. So that you can be found worthy in their eyesight. Can we be honest in here tonight? How many of us have been found in a contest for the affection of a man? Going against another woman or more than one woman. Hoping that we ultimately get the ring. Get to become queen. Now don't miss this, because if you can't relate to this in particular, I'm sure you have something in your past that if it was put on display for the world to see, they absolutely wouldn't call you a woman of God. The way that you spoke to him or her. The way that you put your hands on him and or her. The way that you engaged in the things that you engaged in and or consumed behind the scenes, behind closed doors, when you thought nobody was looking. You know that season of your life when you were looking for love in all the wrong places, searching for voids to be filled, desiring just to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be loved, to be chosen. You know, that season of your life when you were wrapped up, tied up, tangled up in what may have felt good in the moment. With what may have positioned you to experience better in that moment. But it was outside of God's perfect will for your life. This is all that we are reading about with Esther.
That's it.
A season of her life where her life, her movement, her action, and or her experience did not reflect God's desires, God's best for her life. So back to the text, because as I really continue to dive into Esther 2, there were some things that seemed to really follow Esther in spite of Esther. Hear me, Esther clearly had been through some things. She had experienced some heartache. She was familiar with pain and loss. She didn't do things God's way all of the time. But I kept reading things like favor.
Come on.
And grace. And delight. And pleasure. And love. And y'all, that messed me up. Hear me, the word favor means to feel or show approval or preference for. It is to be accepted, to be seen as adequate or suitable. The Hebrew word used for favor in this text literally speaks to goodness, kindness, and faithfulness. So this says to me that in spite of what she had experienced, in spite of what life had communicated prior to this point, in spite of what she had done to get to this point, hear me, and in spite of what she would do in the future, God allowed favor to follow her. He allowed goodness and kindness and faithfulness to be her portion. He graced her, loved her, delighted said that in spite of her, he chose her. In spite of her, he blessed her. In spite of her, he preferred her. In spite of her, he delighted in her. In spite of her, she was adequate, suitable, perfect for the job. And what he saw, what he declared, who he chose, he allowed other people to express it. So hear me when I tell you this, sis. The favor of God is upon your life. Somebody needs to catch that in the spirit right now. The favor of God is upon your life. I know you have been through some things, but God graced you in it. I know that life has communicated one thing, but God has declared the opposite of it. I know that you think your past has disqualified you, but I'm here to tell you that God still prefers you. You are his choice. You are enough. You are adequate. You are suitable. You are chosen to fulfill the purposes of the Most High God. Not because of you, but in spite of you. Goodness and mercy have followed you all the days of your life. Back to the text. Esther becomes queen. She celebrated and gifted accordingly, and this brings us to Esther chapter 3. Now keep in mind that up to this point, the background, the nation, the culture of Queen Esther, the fact that she was of Jewish descent, it has not been revealed. Yes. Because her cousin, Mordecai, he commands her not to reveal that information up front. So again, you have a woman who has a history, who has connections, who has a culture, a language, a name, an upbringing that is different from those that she's surrounded by. Even when her life isn't reflecting that difference. So fast forward, and for the sake of time, I'm going to paraphrase this, but the king promotes a man by the name of Haman to the level that all the king's servants are now required to bow down and pay homage to this man. Now walk with me for just a moment, because the Hebrew word for the word worship means to bow down, to depress, to prostrate oneself. Likewise, the Hebrew word for the phrase bow down means to bend, to kneel, to sink down to one's knees. Now, when you look at the English definition for bow down is to bend your knees, your body, and or lower your head in front of someone, hear me, that you agree is worthy of respect and more powerful than you are. To lay prostrate is to position your body flat on the ground with your face downwards. These are physical expressions, physical demonstrations of reverence, adoration, submission, humility, and weakness. So ultimately, the king was requiring Mordecai, who worked within the king's gates, to physically demonstrate an act of worship, an act of reverence, an act of adoration to a man who was not the God that he served. Now, but the people that had a problem with it, he had no issue in saying, okay, it's because I am of Jewish descent. It's because I serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And because of that, I am unable to move the way that everybody else is willing to move. I'm willing to bow down to this, because at the end of the day, I'm not like you.
Come on now.
And I'm not going to stay here long, but if we are honest, this is the decision that some of us really need to make. Because we may not have been physically bowing down, submitting, worshiping something else, but there is absolutely someone or something that is receiving from us what should be exclusively for him. And if we are going to walk in purpose, ladies, it needs to be clear who we worship. I'm not giving you what he has made clear belongs to him. I'm not bowing down to what didn't create me. I'm not giving you that type of power over me. I'm not demonstrating weakness in this. I'm not submitting to fear in this. I'm not going to cause myself to be brought low for anybody other than my Savior. Listen to me, I've got work to do, and I can't do that well without making a decision to refuse to bow down. Sis, you got to refuse to bow down to your emotions, to your insecurities, to fear, to your cravings, to anything and everything that could hinder you from operating in, say it with me, purpose.
That's good.
You got to make a choice. I'm not bowing down to that. Why? Because I'm walking in purpose. So it has to be clear who I worship.
Yeah, must be clear.
So it is brought to Haman's attention that there is one particular man that refuses to bow down. That refuses to acknowledge him in this way. That refuses to pay homage to him. And he is heated. I'm talking about mad, y'all. Boiling. So much so that it's not enough to just kill Mordecai. No, I want all the Jews. I want to destroy, annihilate, exterminate an entire nation.
Come on.
Which just so happens to be God's chosen nation. So he sets his plan in motion with the authority that he has been given, and word begins to spread. And about 11 months later, every official, every leader, every person of rank in every province, they are decreed that they have to participate in actively wiping out an entire nation. So when Mordecai gets the news of this decree, the text says that he tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city. So this is simply an outward demonstration of his spiritual and emotional state or condition. Scripture tells us, hear me, that Mordecai cried out with a loud and bitter cry. This was a cry of distress. This was a painful cry. This was a cry from someone who was in trouble, someone who was suffering, someone who was struggling. And not only was Mordecai responding in this manner, but the Jews everywhere, the people of God everywhere were physically, outwardly demonstrating their distress. The text says that they were mourning, fasting, weeping, and wailing. What does wailing mean? Oxford Languages defines it as making a prolonged, high-pitched sound, crying with pain, grief, or anger. The people of God were crying out. Now, as a reminder, Psalms 57:2, the conference thing, reads in the New King James Version, I will cry out to God Most High, who performs all things for me. The Amplified Version reads, I will cry to God Most High, who accomplishes all things on my behalf, for he completed my purpose in his plan. So as I really took some time to think about this, God began to minister to me, and he helped me to realize that this is where some of his people have been missing the mark. You see, somewhere along the way, we have gotten accustomed to suffering in silence. We've gotten accustomed to hiding our problems and masking our pain. We have gotten accustomed to showing up one way when we really feel like death is near. Like destruction is imminent, like ruin is our portion. We are pretending with our families, pretending on our jobs, pretending, hear me, in the church, pretending in the face of God, and even pretending with ourselves. Hear me, we have played a role for so long, we don't even know what's real and what's not. Somewhere along the way, we have gotten used to this place where it's uncomfortable to really sit with and sit in our pain. It's unfamiliar to really let it be known that we are hurting. It's unheard of to really release our emotion, our anger, our grief, our sorrow, especially publicly. You see, because what goes on in this house? Oh, so y'all got that? Okay. All right, listen to me, people of God. As I took my best to express the heart of God in this moment. When I say to you, it's time to cry out. Amen. It's time to release a sound. Amen. It's time to stop suffering in silence. Hear me clearly. God is not intimidated by your emotions. And he will not abandon you or reject you because you express them. It's time that we start getting real in the presence of God about where we really are. It's time to stop ignoring and masking our pain. It's time that we start facing the reality of what's in us. We got to start sitting with and dealing with what has happened to us or what is happening right now in the presence. It's time to cry out regardless of who sees. Back to the text, and I'm almost done. Long story short, without being aware of the decree, word gets back to Esther that her cousin is publicly demonstrating strong emotion. And as a result, Esther attempts to stop it. Like, what's that about, right? Like, fix that. And that's a whole word within itself, because what you really have here is someone who doesn't know the magnitude of your pain attempting to stop you from expressing it in a way that they are uncomfortable with. Nonetheless, I digress. Mordecai refuses to stop. So Esther dives a bit deeper into the why and finds out that the decree has been sent out that seems to have sealed the fate of the Jewish nation. And Mordecai makes a request in this moment for Queen Esther to go before the king and plead with him on behalf of her people. Esther responds, she's like, listen, okay, wait, that sounds good, right? But you know, like I can't just not go before the king, unless I'm called, and I haven't been called in 30 days, and not only that, you know that anybody that attempts to approach the king that hasn't been called, they're subject to death.
Yeah. Jesus. Yeah.
Unless the king chooses to make an exception. Mordecai says in so many words, I hear you, but listen, don't think that just because you're in the palace, that you're not a Jew. Don't forget where you come from. Don't forget who you in relationship with. Don't forget who raised you.
Yeah.
Don't think you exempt from experiencing what we experienced just because you are now the queen. Just because you're in Hollywood. Just because your location has changed. If you hold your peace, if you remain silent, if you fail to speak up on behalf of your people, relief and deliverance will come for us from somewhere else.
Come on.
But you in your father's house, oh, y'all gonna perish. But then he seals it with this. Yet who knows
My God.
whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. In other words, what if God has used your mistakes, used your experiences, used your history to purposely position you for this moment, to purposely position you to save the people of God, to purposely position you to be a source of deliverance for the people of God, to purposely position you to bring relief to the people of God. What if you only went through that so that you could be in position for this? Listen to the word of God. Has really caused favor to follow you so that it can actually benefit more than you.
Come on. Teach the word.
Every move this woman made from that point on was with purpose. And it was on purpose. As she partnered with God to successfully save the people of God. And as I close, I'm here to tell you that what you think disqualified you from purpose actually positioned you on purpose. So don't you dare get here and allow shame, guilt, fear, or anything else to silence you. Because you were created for such a time as this.